Oh, yes.
for what it's worth.
Got it.
Hopefully you will not be hacked again.
Well, if I get hacked, I'm going to be out of connections. So I've asked them for another connection, but I don't know if I'll get it or not. Welcome, everybody.
Okay, Sandy.
Hey, Lindsay, how are you? And Anne
Hi, nice to see everyone.
Hi, Ann.
and Nina. Nina showed up.
Yes, yes. Who would miss this? I find this reading very exciting. I'm very
I'm looking forward to it all
interested in
day.
hearing the I'm really interested in the discussion here, you know,
Me too.
'cause it's fascinating.
I hope you underlined a lot of things you want to talk about. We're going to depend.
Well, it just, you know, it's in my head. I mean, yes, it's out there.
I have no doubt, and that you will have much to contribute tonight.
Oh,
Gordy, one of the things that Sean asks, and I don't know if he asked you as well, is if we were planning to have the Thanksgiving Eve, which is a Wednesday, our group meet or not. And I guess we need to get a consensus of the group and see if they want to.
Oh, good point. I hadn't even considered that.
Yeah, I told him I would get back with him because I think he must have been asked about that from Rod of Shalom folks. So
Sean,
Sean is, his last name is Sanford. Sean Sanford.
who is that?
Sean apparently is well, he helps out in the administration and the clergy, I think.
Where
Rod-
at Rodef? Oh, okay. All right. Yes, we should definitely talk about that tonight. And make plans. I'm sure we'll not want to meet that evening. Which would extend it. So that would be the 23rd.
I think so, yes.
Okay. Well, once we get started this evening, I'm sorry, this is Gordy Tucker. I'm invisible tonight. My voice only. I'm the invisible man. But we will.
like the voice of God. That's fine.
Oh God, no.
We can't see you, but we hear you.
Oh, I don't know. That's like the hide your
Yeah,
face. Do not
never
want to
mind.
see me.
Do with that with you what you will.
Exactly.
So that's no on the 22nd.
Third.
23rd is Wednesday.
Or
November.
20, I have to look at my,
Thanksgiving Day is the
It's
20th.
Wednesday,
Yes.
November 23rd. No.
Is no then, okay. So that's a definite no on the 23rd. Okay,
yeah, Wednesday, the 23rd.
yeah, okay,
So we're going to skip that day.
yeah. It's Erev, we would say Erev Thanksgiving. The Jews would say, it means eve of.
Okay,
Like Erev Shabbat, the eve of Shabbat. And that's because that's when our holidays start the night before at sundown.
All the days start that way, Ann.
Yes, so it's the night before, that's when the holiday starts is when the sun goes down, right?
So we're canceling Wednesday, the 23rd of November, correct, Amente?
so we'll go through what then?
So
Well, originally it was December 7th, so I guess we had extended another week.
that would be to Wednesday, the
Okay.
14th of December.
Day that was living in for me, huh? So now we have the 14th, yeah.
Okay, so we'll go through December
Seven.
14th. Okay,
Yes, okay,
Unless we decide differently, we come up to the 7th and we want to quit at that point. But at this point, yes, extended another week.
Okay, I'll let Sean know
Okay.
about that. So Gordy, are you
Well,
ready to start?
Yep, I am, and welcome to everybody. I'm here, Gordy Tucker. I'm a blank screen on the um, on the screen here. I'd like to welcome Rebecca Bliss, who's joining us for the first time, and I see Rabbi Bernie, who is here with us tonight. Thank
Ooh.
you. Good to see you, Rabbi.
Pleasure. Nice to see you all.
Yes.
I do apologize. I'm going to have to leave early, but I didn't want to miss 2 weeks in a row. So I'm sorry to have missed last week. So very excited to
worries.
be here.
No worries, Bernie. Even the amount of time you're here will be welcome. So thank you. And we had attempted to Rabbi Carey from Rodef Shalom, who's the educational director, I guess would be the proper word, at Rodef, had indicated that she would be here tonight. We will see. So, God, I hate this, not being able to see myself and all of you. I hope you don't mind not seeing me. It's probably a good thing, right?
I hate it too.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a
Weird.
really handsome fellow, according to some people. So we'll continue our discussion of the book, A Rabbi Talks with Jesus, an intermillennial interfaith exchange by Rabbi Jacob Nisner. And last week we talked about Rabbi Nisner laid out kind of the parameters of what his engagement was with Jesus. He considered himself an avatar, if you will. He was there back in the 1st century CE, Common Era, and interested in this person, this prophet, this sage called Jesus, Yahshua, and followed him. And he had questions about this person, and that forms the discussion that follows. And Rabbi Nisner chose the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, as the appropriate book with which to discuss his discussions with Jesus. And he leads off, so we're going to get right into it this week with the Sermon on the Mount, which is in Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5. And the first thing he touches base with is not to destroy, but to fill, versus you have heard that it was said, but I say to you. And the quote from Matthew 5, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And I hope you all received the notes that Sandy sent out, copy of the notes that I sent out. So you have those in front of you, maybe, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Gail is showing them on the screen. Great. Tangible evidence that they are there. Yes. So, Rabbi Nisner sets up the scenario where he is walking on the dusty paths of the Galilee, following this individual called Yeshua, and he cites the Sermon on the Mount, which he describes as Jesus's principal statement of teaching. And around Jesus that gather are his disciples, and coincidentally the bystanders, many bystanders, and he teaches them his Torah. And I made a distinction last week between capital T Torah, which is the law passed down to Moses from God at Mount Sinai, and the lowercase Torah, which is the law, the instruction given by the sage or the prophet. Here is what he tells people how things are, what they should do, and how God wants us to live. He invites arguments, and Rabbi Neusner says, well, respecting this individual, I want to hear what he has to say, but I honor him by arguing with him about certain points. And this opens the way to contention, as every teacher who wants to change people's minds. When we first hear from Jesus, rather than merely about him, he is telling people about God's kingdom, which is to say the dominion of heaven here on earth. When Jews recite the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone," from Deuteronomy, they thereby accept the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, as the teachers of Torah say, which is to say they accept the commandments that God has given to us in the covenant of Sinai. The Torah remains valid. That is Jesus' message, and he has every right to a careful hearing. Say what you need to say, and I will listen, and if necessary, I will argue with you on those points. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus begins with what are known as the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth.
Recording in progress.
Could all of you please mute yourself until
Everybody,
There's
please
something wrong here.
everybody mute, okay?
Everybody needs to.
mute themselves, please. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sakes, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And the avatar of Rabbi Neusner says, no problem. This is good. I get this. But then the tone changes. For the next words are jarring, at least in Rabbi Neusner's view. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Jesus has now shifted from the poor in spirit, the mourners, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and who are merciful, to you, from all Jews, today's eternal Israel, to those who are persecuted on my account. However, the next few words are reassuring. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. That sets the stage that every sage in every generation should meet. Receive a tradition whole and perfect, hand it on intact, but always unimpaired, and thereby take a rightful place in the tradition from Sinai. It is a task of every generation both to receive and to hand on sayings of the founders of Judaism. Moses received Torah at Sinai and handed it on to Joshua, Joshua to elders, and elders to prophets, and prophets handed it on to the men of the great assembly. They said three things: to be prudent in judgment, raise up many disciples, and make a fence for the Torah. That's from the Mishnah Tractate Avot, chapter 1. Therefore, we should expect from Jesus not merely a reprise or paraphrase of scripture, but something fresh and new, and yet wholly part of that received Torah. Now handed on, we are prepared to hear this master's renewal of the Torah. We hear then a sequence of lessons, each of them prefaced by the statement that other prior masters teach a lesser truth, but Jesus a greater one. These are what is meant by not abolishing, but fulfilling the Torah and the prophets. So they are in order. There are 5 of them. You have heard what it is said, you shall not kill. But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother shall be liable. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And I always think of Jimmy Carter when I read that. His interview in Playboy about 30, 40 years ago, and he had lusted in his heart. And who would have thought, Jimmy Carter?
Yeah, Carter.
Yeah. Again, number 3. Again, you have heard that it was said to the men of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not swear at all. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist one who is evil. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other one also. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. In other words, what Rabbi Neusner is saying, what Rabbi Neusner is saying that Jesus said, conduct yourself in such a way that you will avoid even the things that cause you to sin, not only sin itself. And what a challenge that is, right? But as Rabbi Neusner points out, many of the teachings of the wisdom writings and prophecy will lead to these same worthy conclusions. Jesus' Torah with a lowercase t meets the challenge the sages set for themselves, which is not only to receive the Torah, the uppercase Torah, but also to hand it on. And the means not only to repeat or to paraphrase, but to teach, to explain, to extend, amplify, and enrich. And in these sayings, that is precisely what Jesus accomplishes. Any comments to this point? We're going to go on. Rabbi Neusner is going to say, well, yeah, but Jesus kind of misses the mark. Leslie.
We have, as Jews, I'll speak for myself, take issue with the description and the instructions on number 4, and a similar view of number 5. So we're not really into turning our cheeks so you can hit me on the other side. That's not what we do. And I've always had a very difficult time with this concept. I know that historically Jews are not thought of as fighters, but we're defenders. And, I'm not gonna let you smack me around. That's one point. On the item number 5, we also have that concept, and I don't know the time frame. I should probably know the time frame better, but one of our very learned women, who was the wife of a rabbi, reminded her husband that that the idea was not to wish harm to your enemy, but to pray for that enemy to turn around, to find the right path. Much like this number 5. And Rabbi Gerson, you probably know the time frame on Beruria, but I don't remember it. And her husband was named Rabbi Meir. So I'm just throwing those thoughts out there from my own Jewish perspective.
And Cohen? Oh, and then Sandy.
Yeah, I'll say that before the rabbi says it. Here's the Jewish meaning of an eye for an eye. The rabbis, it's a rabbinic teaching that statement has to do with compensation for some, in other words, it's what our laws do. What does a person have to pay to make up for what he's done? How does he have to make up for the harm that he's done? It doesn't mean literally an eye for an eye, because what if the person, I think of my personal rabbi now, when a person has one eye and you put out that one eye, then, you know, then he's blind. I mean, the rabbis, from what I understand and what I've been taught, is that the rabbinic interpretation, and that's how we Jews read the Bible in the rabbinic interpretations, that has to do with being fair, and if you break somebody's glasses, you fix them, kind of thing.
Early workers' compensation.
Workers'
compensation.
Yes, it's compensation. That's right. It's compensation, and that's and the rabbis say that's the pshat meaning. That's the full meaning of that. That's what that means. But here Jesus is taking it very literally, as many people do, mostly non-Jews, and they make something out of it. But I just wanted to say that up front, that is not what the Jews understand that to mean. And I agree with Leslie. I mean, we don't abase ourselves that way. We don't put on the hair shirt. We don't, well, at Yom Kippur, we do that. But typically we don't, we don't, yes, hurt ourselves. It's not a good thing.
Sandy, thank you, Ann. Sandy, and then Rebecca.
I just wanted to say about this, if one strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. Our commentaries kind of hedge on this. They say, if they strike you on your right cheek and you turn your left also, you've got his left hand that is not going to be as able to strike you, and so you give shame to him for striking you. So there's a lot of shame that comes into some of these things that seem to be very incomprehensible and impossible. So yeah.
Well, thank you for that interpretation, because I didn't get the nuances of that.
Right. And also it's, just like the Jewish community, we don't take something literally, we take it in the spiritual sense of it. So, anyway, that's the way Episcopalians try to do with the spiritual sense of it rather than literal. But anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rebecca, please add.
Yeah, so how I come to understand an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth isn't necessarily that there will be payback. It's more that things should be just, and so you will not be taking more than what was done. And so in a way, at the time, this was actually just put it a bit more merciful in a way, and giving a bit more grace. And so I think because this passage in the New Testament is about Jesus building a fence around the Torah and saying, well, you should not just be doing this, but you should be going even more so as God's people and as believers. This is about giving even more mercy. That's what I take it to mean.
Great, thank you. I will say, I didn't include, sorry, Roberta, let me say this, that Rabbi Neusner actually focused on those 2 points in his book and saying, no, wait a minute, we Jews do not look at that in quite the same way as Christians do. So you've all focused on a differences of interpretation between the way Christians and Jews look at those two
What were we
statements
talking
and
about
then-
last week? The way-
Roberta, you had a question or comment?
Who are you
Roberta?
talking to? Yeah, I was curious if anybody else had thought about this too. Rabbi Neusner didn't mention it, but from the get-go, Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven. Isn't that kind of a almost uniquely Christian concept? I mean, I've always thought of Judaism as being much less afterlife oriented, and that one would lie down with one's ancestors, which is another we as opposed to an I.
Yeah, Rebecca, jump right in.
Sorry. Yeah, I thought the exact same thing, Roberta. And like the more I've learned is like at this time, a lot of the Jews had been Hellenized and were starting to believe in an apocalyptic time that was coming. So they were believing that this time of judgment could happen any day, like here and now. And it's very different from what we believe as Jews today.
Yeah, it struck me that way.
It's a good point, Rebecca. And I think that many of our gospels and many of our epistles, Paul was expecting to have the end times within his time. So we came by that through our Jewish tradition background. So thank you for sharing that with us. Ann?
Ann, and Susan, maybe jump in, and then Ann.
Okay, thank you. I love the fact that Rebecca mentioned the sentence, make a fence for the Torah, because that struck me as a beautiful sentence. And I actually think that's kind of what we're doing in an interfaith way, making a fence around it, understanding that there are, spaces, moving out from the teachings, and that there are nuances, and that there is room under this or in this fence for our strong beliefs to somehow be together.
Good
And
point.
that is a Jewish concept as well, a fence around the Torah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Definitely.
Ann, yes, Ann?
I'm going to say what my original reaction was, and I say this respectfully, but I was, and he's going to come to this. Jesus had already, at this point, returned. I mean, was risen, right?
Oh, no, not on the Sermon on the Mount. No, he's
Oh,
alive.
really?
Oh, yeah.
Well, because it sounds like he's setting himself up as another God, is what I'm saying. And Christians see him as a God. And so they don't hear this from his mouth as being wrong, because he has as much say so. And Sandy, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I just think the Christian, the way you see it is differently. For us, he's simply a man. But for you, it's God. And so so he can say, he has authority to speak in that way. And that's the way he's speaking, thinking of himself. Now, am I wrong in that? Or
You're very accurate. And I think that Rabbi Neusner, in some of his arguments, does not realize that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Jesus is God's wisdom incarnate. So, so that's where we're going to find a lot of, in fact, as far as I can tell, all of the problems he has with
Mhm.
is around that. And you're very right, Ann.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. But what Rabbi Neusner is doing is he's encountering Jesus as a man, as a young man, teaching and wandering through the Galilee, instructing his disciples. And this is a very real, very bodily Jesus at the time. This is not the resurrected Jesus. But it brings up the question, the one that I had wondered about is like, well, Rabbi Neusner questions Jesus in saying these things as if he is simply another prophet or sage, when in fact, from a Christian perspective, he is in fact divine. So,
You guys, Rabbi Gerson's had his hand up for a long time.
Oh,
I'm sorry, Rabbi.
Question that came up a while ago.
Yeah, no worries. It's totally fine. I've enjoyed listening to all of you. I think this is a very interesting intersection of beliefs and belief systems, and a great opportunity to see how theology drives interpretation of biblical text. And what's interesting about these passages is that I'm captivated much more by the citation in number 5. And just to answer what Leslie was thinking about out loud, Bruria was about 100 years after Jesus. But this whole idea of you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, I think gives us a great opportunity to contrast love in the Jewish tradition and love in the Christian tradition. You know how we have, a lot of us have those signs on in our yards, and one of the lines is love is love. Love is not always love. There is a difference. And I would argue that that Jewish love is much more of a love of duty that is a byproduct of our call from God, whereas Christian love, as I've come to appreciate it, and I really do appreciate it, is much more of an emotional type of affinity that we are to have towards other human beings in reflection of God. And I think that perhaps is what causes the Jews to react so much to turn the other cheek. Although I am, like Leslie, very intrigued by what Sandy just shared about the interpretation of turn the other cheek. It's a great one. I'd never heard that before.
We do
but
our
I
best
think
to explain these things.
absolutely. But I think there is, there's a lot of intersection there that's fascinating.
Thank you.
Nan Fullerton.
The other thought that I had about turning the other cheek and even love is that whole notion of, if you pay attention to someone's misbehavior or you try to exact revenge, well, from my perspective, it gets you nowhere. If you turn the other cheek, another way of saying is that I'm ignoring you. What you are trying to do is not something that is registering with me. At the same time, it feels like turning the other cheek, or an eye for a tooth for a tooth. I like the idea of justice. In other words, you don't mix things up. In other words, if someone has taken from you, it is reasonable to either take them to court or do whatever you need to do to get justice, because it's important to do that. You don't let somebody off the hook because you basically are saying what they're doing is okay, and it's not. Thank you.
Thanks, Nan.
Any other comments? We'll move on. Otherwise, Rebecca.
Bernie
Yes.
You've got 2 more hands up,
Oh, Rebecca, and who else?
Jerry and Gary.
Oh, Rebecca and then Jerry. Or Gary, sorry.
Okay, my comments, it's really quick, but I guess it's just something that I'm intrigued by when Jesus is saying that you should not swear at all, and what he's getting at. Because I'm not sure, but I think it's just an interesting line there.
Thanks, Rebecca. Was it Jerry or Gary that had a comment?
It was Gary.
Gary, hi.
Hi, Gordon. I've always felt that prophecy has two components. There's an immediate component and some future component, right? As Rabbi Gerson said, the future component is always impacted by theology, but we seem to be putting aside the immediate component, right? Jesus was pretty much speaking before rabbis. Yeah, there was Hillel, there was Shammai. They basically represented a very small segment of the Jewish population. Most Jews at the time would never have met a rabbi, and certainly rabbis were not running synagogues. This was temple Judaism, right? And so a lot of the assumptions you make about Judaism may not hold true. We for example, the rabbis do interpret an eye for an eye as monetary balancing, but we don't know what the Sadducees would have interpreted it as, and they're a fairly significant portion of the community, and they rejected the oral law completely. That doesn't mean that they might have interpreted it the same way, right? We don't have any of their writings, so I'm not suggesting the Sadducees were out cutting people's eyes out, but it is a possibility, and that would have been just as valid as Judaism of the rabbis at the time. So when Jesus was speaking, he may have been staking some ground at the time, saying, "Look, I don't buy into that." And then turning the other cheek, the Christian Bible is filled with stories of Pharisees coming up to Jesus and his followers, demanding some proof or trial, or right. And it is possible that that's what he meant. Right? Don't do what they're doing. Right? Don't look for trouble, and if they come for you, just turn the other cheek. Try to work with that. Right? And the same thing when you're dealing with the Romans, who I'm sure right? It was we were only 30 years from the Great Revolt, 35 years, and so that again, there may have been a very based upon what they were seeing and experiencing, a very cogent warning. Don't do what other people are doing to us. Turn the other cheek. Try to just get by, and our message will triumph in the end. Right. So I'm not saying that later interpretations are not meaningful. Again, there's that future component, but the current, the on the time component, I think would have been very valid, and I think Rabbi Newsom misses that. He's really not in the context. Thank you.
And I think that's a really good point, Gary, that a lot of these are stories and over time they take on different meanings for different people. So I think that's a good point.
Thank you, Anne.
I just wanted to add quickly, when the Jews also have a very strong sense, especially, and that's why so many did not get out of Germany, because now the sense is we don't keep a low profile, don't make trouble. When I think we had a Jew running for vice president, I can't remember his name, he was a conservative even, but and when I went over to Buddha, I was visiting over in the in the Middle East, and the congregation said to me, he shouldn't be doing that. A Jew doing that? No, he should, this is dangerous. So what you're saying is true. People do feel that don't get into, stay low, lay low, and that's how you'll get by. And this is why so many were slaughtered. They just didn't leave. They just thought they'd stay low. Nobody will bother them. Keep the czar far away from us. I'm quoting Fiddler, but that's the whole idea, to stay low, keep a low profile. And Jews today, And Jews really felt that, I think, through history. And they didn't realize that they couldn't escape if they were, they couldn't be saved by doing that.
Well, and I think Gary brings a very good point is, and one of the issues with Rabbi Neusner, he's putting himself back, he's attempting to put himself back in the context of actually being there when this master, Jesus, is talking. And he's reflecting on 2,000 years of Jewish and Christian thought since that time. And I think he is influenced by his own background. And there are times when he actually sits down and talks with Jesus, asks Jesus a question, but it's a question that Jesus can't answer because the text is mute on that, because no one asked him that question at the time. And so he sets Jesus up in some respects for interpretation that is not maybe pertinent to what the actual Jesus might have answered if this person had actually had asked that question at the time.
Gordy, Jerry had his hand up a long time ago.
Yeah,
He
Jerry,
put it
please.
down.
Thank you.
Jerry.
Well, I was going to make my comment later, I guess now, but most of the issues that the author takes with what Jesus said can be explained if you believe that Jesus is divine, which he does not. I do. And if you believe that he is divine, then the statements that he makes make sense. If you don't believe that he's divine, then they don't make sense. And so that's the separation, and that's the problem that the author has with what he says. We could spend considerable time going into why Christians believe that Jesus was divine, is divine, but that's probably not a topic for this meeting.
Thank
Could
you,
be.
Jerry. Thank you, Jerry. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is
Well,
divine- wait,
Susan.
Jerry,
Jerry, Gail?
is divine at this point? I thought at this point, we didn't know that Jesus had died and risen, that he was at this point, I don't want to say just a man, but
True.
At this point, he had not been crucified and
Right.
risen. That is true. But at this point, he was still divine. At least my understanding and belief is that he was. In fact, he said that he was. He said at one point, and I don't remember which gospel, maybe Sandy can help me, but he said at one point, I and the Father are one. So he believed he was divine, and there are a number of reasons why I can say I also believe he was divine.
Susan and then Nina. Susan,
Okay.
Nina.
Thank you. Thank you to Jerry and to everyone who's been speaking about this. It really teases so many threads out for me. And I feel that it's almost as though there are two threads braided together in this Jesus who's delivering the Sermon on the Mount. He is aware in some deep sense that he is divine, but he's also aware that he's man. He's reaching out to people as men, individuals, but that is also reaching out to something very spiritual, maybe a spark of the divine in each of them. So this is really getting very beautifully complex. That's all I want to say right now.
Thank you, Susan. Nina? Thank you, Susan.
I was just going to say, I don't I think most of the people that were coming up to on the road and wherever Jesus was teaching had no idea yet, about his divinity. It wasn't clear even to the 12 for quite a while, and they puzzled over it. So yeah, it's complex. Who knows who knew what at that point, so or thought what.
Well, that's actually, oh, Sandy.
I can understand how difficult this must be for the Jewish community, because some of the things he says sounds like he's crazy. He's egocentric. He's, it's very hard to accept. And even in Mark, his family thought he was crazy, and they tried to remove him from the scene. So anyway, it's an honest reaction to think that this is pretty crazy talk. And Jerry, go.
Sorry.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis in his book Mere Christianity says that Jesus either was who he said he was, or he was a raving maniac.
Or he's a poached egg.
And I agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, that's precisely what I think. Oh, sorry, Deborah? DeBray?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think that gets to the crux of what the Rabbi Jacob Nussner is saying, is he can't follow him because his statements are such that they're, in the Christianity view, divine and make sense, but he's not buying that. And therefore, with due respect, he's saying, I'm going a different way. So I think we've hit the crux of the issue of why he's having difficulty and isn't going to follow him.
Yeah.
And I think that we've hit the crux of it, but it doesn't mean this book isn't valuable, because I think that the conversation brings up some things that are very important for Christians to give some thought to. The Sabbath may be one of them. Deborah?
DeBray, but I actually agree, because I had no idea of the difference, and only by the rabbi writing this book can I see the differences and where we go a different path, not with respect, as he said, but these are where the differences are. So I think it's an incredibly valuable experience. I agree with you, Sandy.
Well, and Rabbi Nussner, sets himself up as a participant at the time, listening to this. He had no idea who this Jesus was, and certainly had no idea that later traditions would consider him divine. And noting that he misses the mark, as we say. And he points out, Rabbi Nussner points out, that Jesus addresses not eternal Israel, but a group of disciples. His focus, time and time again, defines a limited vision in Rabbi Nussner's point of view. But eternal Israel comes forth from Sinai, not a collection of families, but something more, a collectivity that adds up to much more than the sum of the parts, much more than families, but rather a people, a nation, a society, a kingdom of priests, and a holy people. We hear a message from home and hearth for growing up and growing old, but not for community, state, and ongoing social order, such as eternal Israel comprises in this world. And eternal Israel needs Torah to tell us what God wants of us. But Jesus has spoken only about how I, and that would be you and me, I, in particular, can do what God wants of me. In the shift from us of the Sinai to the I of the lowercase Torah of the Galilean sage, Jesus takes an important step, and according to Rabbi Nussner, in the wrong direction. Here is a Torah teacher who says in his own name what the Torah says in God's name. For what kind of Torah that is it that improves upon for what kind of lowercase Torah is it that improves upon the teachings of the uppercase Torah without acknowledging the source? And it is God who is the source of those teachings. And as we have identified tonight, if the source, Jesus, is in fact divine, then he in fact is speaking as if he is the new Torah. Okay. Yes, Anne.
I underlined this part of the book, and I thought it was an interesting comment. He says, Jesus was not thinking of public justice. He's quoting somebody else, Montefiore, but Jesus was not thinking of public justice, the order of civic community, the organization of states, but only how the members of his religious brotherhood should act toward each other and towards those outside their ranks. Public justice is outside his purview. And you could comment that I thought that was an interesting comment because and Sandy referenced Shabbat. I mean, for us, there are certain prayers that we can't say without a minyan. You can't say, you have to have because it's done in a group. We're very group conscious. And so this was it's a different look. And I just thought that was interesting, the statement that, how Jesus was seeing this, as opposed to the way Moses saw the community.
Sandy?
I think we are in the realm of both the individual and the community. And this is the realm of God, the kingdom of God. Jesus talked endlessly about, which happens to be, the group, the community, as well as the individual. So yeah, I think that was one of my comments in the gutter of my book. It's like, come on, it's both and here.
Thank you. That's why I brought that up, Sandy. Thank you. I just pushed in that too.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good segue, because the last section is there. He taught as one who had authority. And the prophet Moses speaks not in his own name, but in God's name, saying what God has told him to say, what God has told him to say. Jesus speaks not as a sage, nor as a prophet. Moses alone had authority. The scribes teach the message and meaning of what Moses had set down as the Torah on the authority of God. How do we make sense within the framework of the Torah of a teacher who stands apart from, perhaps above the Torah? We're talking about Jesus now. At Sinai, God spoke through Moses. On the Galilean hill, Jesus speaks for himself. Moses spoke for God to us, that is eternal Israel. And we, Israel, responded as we. We shall do, we shall obey. In Galilee, Jesus speaks to crowds who are astonished at his teaching, identifying in the crowds the special hearers, those revealed on his account, individuals among eternal Israel, hearing this master addressing them not as their scribes, but as one who had authority. One might have asked, "Sir, how come you speak on your own say-so, and not out of the teachings of Torah given by God by Moses at Sinai? It looks though you see yourself as Moses, or as more than Moses. But the Torah of Moses does not tell me that God is going to give instruction, that is lowercase Torah, through someone besides Moses or the other prophets, or there is going to be another large uppercase Torah. You are I, but the Torah speaks only to a we, to the us of Israel, including you. But if the disciple standing at the edge of the crowd came up to me, this is the avatar of Jacob Nusser, and said, not so bad, eh? Come on with us. I would have said, if I go with you, I leave God. And amazed, they would have said, how come? Because I would reply, when God speaks to Moses, it is to all Israel, but your master speaks to you. The rest of us are outsiders, and God does not know outsiders of Israel, only sinners whom the Torah teaches to repent. Roberta, and then Donna.
It just occurs to me that at Jesus' time, one had to join Jesus and his followers, whereas in the Jewish religion, one just belongs, pretty much.
Yes, comments on Jewish? Yes, Jerry?
Yeah, I think that's true. Jesus brought a different message, and he did not bring the message only to Israel or to the Jews at that time. In fact, one of his last statements before leaving the earth was, go into all the world and teach the gospel to all people, not just the Jews. And I'll go back to the statement, someone besides Moses or the other prophets. Other prophets did talk about someone to come. And if you read the 53rd chapter of Isaiah, I feel that it describes Jesus to a T. It talks exactly about his life, what happened in his life, and Isaiah prophesied that.
And Jeremiah 33 also, the new covenant was very, very much like Jesus.
By the way, the Jews don't read Isaiah that way. I just want to say that. We don't read it that way.
That's a good point, Anne.
Big surprise.
I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying we don't, we don't see that.
When I
Read
was
it
in
that way.
Iowa, if you guys remember Pam Eisenbaum, that she kicked off our Paul series.
Mhm.
Leslie, I think you were one of her students, and
Right,
Nina was
right.
one of her students. Anyway, I remember being totally horrified when she said one day, she said, Torah is to the Jews as Jesus is to the Christians. And I thought, I would think God would be to the Jews as Jesus is to the Christians. Of course, that's the way I was looking at it at that time. So, but I think this is it's helpful for us to think of in the way she thinks about that the Torah is to the Jews as Jesus is to the Christian. And so I think that came to fore in our discussion tonight, really.
Let me conclude and then we can have some last thoughts. So Rabbi Neusner said, no, if I were there that day, I would not have joined those disciples and followed the master on his way. I would have turned back to my own family and to my village, going on with my life as part of and within eternal Israel. I do take exception to a teaching that pertains to me personally, but not to my family and my village, to eternal Israel. So Rabbi Neusner's perspective on what he interprets what Jesus was saying, his view of what Jesus was saying at that time, and following him on that path, he would have turned aside and gone on his way. Many did not. Many of his disciples, all of them were Jews, and they followed him. So they were seeking something. They saw something in this person called Jesus at that time that was attractive, that was not what wasn't being fulfilled at the time, and I don't know what that is. Thoughts, Jerry?
Yeah, and they hadn't seen the best act yet.
What is that, Jerry?
The resurrection.
Ah.
That's what Christianity is all about. It either happened or it didn't. If you believe it did, and there are many reasons that I could go into why I believe it did, but that's what separates Christians from Jews, is belief in the resurrection. It happened or it didn't.
Thank you, Jerry. Paul, you got your hand up. You have the little symbol there. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think otherwise, if there was no argument, there would be no book. And so I'm convinced that if Rabbi Neusner wants to go ahead and make the point that he turns after he listens to what Jesus says and says, I'm not having of it, and returning to my family, obviously he doesn't accept, I think, the concept that he has set up for himself as to who Jesus was and to whom he was speaking and what he was asking people to go ahead and do. He just doesn't think that eternal Israel from Moses has anything to go ahead and garnish from the words of Jesus as rabbi or as prophet. And therefore, he is willing to go ahead and go back to some sources about what Jesus is saying. And basically, because of the points that Gordy made in the discussion, he is not buying it. And if he's not buying it, therefore, there is a good reason to go ahead and reject it. Not reject the ideas of what Jesus is saying, but he doesn't think that Jesus is talking to Israelites and to the Jewish people. And therefore, he's waving his hand and said, nice talking to you, but color me unconvinced. So, I mean, that's really the subject of the book, and it's a matter of the respect that he gives to Jesus that's important, and it's respectful listening to him describe what he's hearing, but it's a little bit short of what it is that he was looking for, Rabbi Neusner. So that's where the book sort of begins to make its argument.
Thank you, Paul. And Jerry, you had a riposte comment?
Yes, thank you. You know, at this point in time that we're reading about, Jesus' disciples weren't all that sure themselves. Look before the crucifixion. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, the day of the crucifixion. After the resurrection, Thomas said, unless I touch the nail prints in his hand, I won't believe that he rose from the dead. So they didn't believe it either, and that's where everything goes to the resurrection. After the resurrection, Jesus was seen by over 500 people. He had personal encounters with many of his disciples that are recorded in the book of Acts, particularly. And so if you were just listening to Jesus in the as far as we've gotten so far, a man sitting alongside the road talking to a bunch of followers, I can see where those followers might not be convinced, and why Jacob Neusner would not be convinced at this point. As I said, Peter and Thomas weren't really convinced either.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a good point, Susan. Good point, Jerry. But you know, Peter and the others, Simon, they followed regardless, and yet Neusner sets him his avatar up there, who said, "I would walk away," and I'm thinking that there were many who didn't follow, precisely at that time, simply following this, and later, whatever happened later, you know, was certainly different. Susan.
Yeah. Thank you. I was thinking all this time of the sentence in section F of he taught as one who had authority, when Neusner said he would say to the disciples, if I go with you, I leave God. Now that to me is an utter panic statement. He's saying, my belief is a thread. It's like gossamer. I need to hold on to it. And I think we've all used the word believe so many times in this past hour. You know, we all hold very, we cling to our belief because it gives meaning to our life. And so even though I came down on the other side as a Christian, as an Episcopalian, from Neusner's argument, I feel for him. I feel for him as he's saying, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my understanding of God, my connection with my faith tradition.
Wow.
Thank you, Susan. And Jerry, was that your hand up from earlier or something new?
From earlier, I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. Well, we're at 8 o'clock. Wow. As always, we have an incredible discussion here this evening. And fortunately, it will continue. And we'll be here next week. I hope not to be invisible. And we shall see. And thank you all for joining us tonight.
Can I do a benediction?
Yes, please.
Okay. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. And thank you that we've been so gracious to each other. This benefits all of us. Amen.
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 And all God's people say amen.
Amen.
See you all. See you next week.
Thank you. This is wonderful. Stay well, everybody.
Enjoy the sun and rain
Be
tomorrow.
well. You too.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
How do we get this?